There is a way of thinking about time that most people absorb without quite realizing it, a way so deeply embedded in modern culture that it feels less like a belief than like a perception of reality itself. According to this view, time is a process of subtraction. The future is the realm of possibility. The past is possibility foreclosed. Each passing day moves something from the column of what might be to the column of what is done, and what is done is effectively gone. The future is where hope lives. The past is where it goes to die. This understanding is so pervasive that it has shaped the entire apparatus of modern self-help and therapeutic culture. The emphasis on forward movement, on letting go, on new beginnings, on not being anchored to what has already happened. It is an understanding Viktor Frankl spent much of his life arguing against. Frankl's philosophy of time is one of the most distinctive and underappreciated features of his entire body of work. It does not occupy a chapter of its own in most of his books. It surfaces, rather, at crucial moments throughout his writing, like a structural beam that only becomes visible when you know to look for it. But once you see it, you recognize that it is holding everything else up. His understanding of the past as permanent, as indestructible, as a foundation rather than a loss, this understanding was not only a philosophical position. It was, by his own account, one of the things that kept him alive in the concentration camps. And it became, in his clinical practice, one of the most powerful tools he had for reaching patients who had concluded that their lives were over. Frankl arrived at this philosophy through a combination of personal extremity and theoretical reflection. During his years of imprisonment, in Theresienstadt, in Auschwitz, in Kaufering, and Turkheim, he was confronted daily with a peculiar form of temporal distress. The camps systematically destroyed the future. Prisoners were forbidden from speculating about when the war would end, about their release dates, about what they would do after. Any attachment to a specific future date was dangerous, because the camps existed on an entirely different logic from ordinary time. Nothing was scheduled, nothing was reliable, promises meant nothing, and anyone who organized their inner life around a specific anticipated event, Christmas, the end of the war, a particular anniversary, was especially vulnerable to psychological collapse when that event passed without delivering liberation. Frankl observed this vulnerability with clinical precision. He described prisoners who had fixed their psychological survival on the expectation that the war would be over by Christmas of a particular year. When Christmas came and went without liberation, these men did not simply feel disappointed, they collapsed. Their immune systems weakened, their resistance failed, and many of them died within weeks of the disappointment. Frankl interpreted this not simply as the despair of disappointed hope but as something more specific, the death of the future as a psychologically real dimension of existence. When the future is gone, when one genuinely cannot imagine any future that is worth living toward, the present becomes unendurable and the past becomes merely a catalogue of losses. But there was another relationship to time that Frankl observed in some prisoners, and it fascinated him. These were people who had, in some sense, relocated their inner center of gravity from the future to the past. They drew strength not from anticipation but from memory. They thought about what they had built, what they had loved, what they had contributed. They recalled with extraordinary vividness specific experiences, a walk with a spouse, a meal with friends, a moment of professional achievement, a conversation that had meant something, and they inhabited these memories not as nostalgia but as evidence. Evidence that the world contained beauty. Evidence that they themselves had been capable of experiencing and contributing to that beauty. Evidence that, whatever the camps did to their bodies and their futures, could not undo. Frankl's most famous expression of this understanding comes in the passage in Man's Search for Meaning where he describes a vision he had while being marched in the dark, in bitter cold, to the work site. He found himself thinking with extraordinary intensity about his wife, about her face, her expression, her voice. He could not know whether she was still alive. He would in fact later learn that she had died in Bergen-Belsen. But in that moment of marching through the darkness, the reality of her love for him and his love for her was present with a force that the physical misery of the moment could not diminish. He writes, "I understood how a man who has nothing left in this world may still know bliss, be it only for a brief moment, in the contemplation of his beloved." The past, the specific fact of having been loved and having loved, was real in a way that nothing the camp had done could make unreal. From this experience, and from many similar observations, Frankl developed what might be called his doctrine of the permanent past. The core of this doctrine is simple but its implications are vast. What has been cannot be taken away. Whatever a person has done, experienced, loved, created, given, once done, experienced, loved, created, given, it is sealed into the past and therefore into reality in a way that is beyond the reach of any subsequent destruction. The manuscript confiscated at the gates of Auschwitz was gone. But the thinking that had produced it was not gone. It had happened. It was real. It had changed Frankl as a thinker. His years of medical training were not taken by the camps. They had happened. They had made him who he was. His love for Tilly, his wife, was not annihilated by her death. It had been real, it had existed, and its having existed was permanent. This might seem like a philosophical consolation of limited practical value. What good does it do to know that the past is permanent when the present is terrible and the future is uncertain? Frankl was aware of this objection and addressed it directly. He distinguished between what he called a pessimistic orientation and what he called tragic optimism. A pessimistic orientation is one that focuses exclusively on what has been lost, the future foreclosed, the possibilities eliminated, the years remaining growing shorter. A tragic optimist is one who acknowledges all of this and yet finds, in the past, a foundation for continuing to live with full engagement. The pessimist looks at an hourglass and sees the sand running out. The tragic optimist looks at the same hourglass and sees the sand in the lower chamber, the accumulated weight of what has already been lived, as a foundation, not an absence. In his clinical practice, Frankl used this reorientation therapeutically in a particularly important context, working with elderly patients and with people who were terminally ill. These were patients who faced the most obvious form of temporal poverty. Not many years left, perhaps not many months. The conventional psychological approach would focus on acceptance, on making peace with the situation, on extracting whatever enjoyment remained available. Frankl went further. He challenged these patients to recognize what they had already accumulated, to see their lives not as approaching zero but as having filled up to a certain level. He would ask an elderly patient to enumerate what they had done, what they had built, who they had loved, what they had learned, what had been different about the world because of their presence in it. He was not doing this to produce a pleasant retrospective. He was doing it to shift the existential posture of the patient from one oriented toward loss to one oriented toward the permanent reality of what had been lived. Frankl once described an exchange with a very elderly physician whose wife had died 2 years earlier, and who was suffering from severe grief that showed no signs of resolving. The physician asked Frankl what the meaning of his wife's death could possibly be. Frankl did not answer the question directly. Instead, he asked the physician, "What would have happened if you had died first, and she had survived?" The physician was quiet for a moment and then said, "She would have suffered terribly." And Frankl replied, "You have been spared that suffering. You have paid the price of surviving her, and that price is the grief you feel now." The physician's grief did not disappear, but something shifted. The grief was now legible as something, as the cost of a love that had been real, that had mattered, that was sealed permanently into the past as having existed. The pain was not meaningless. It was the precise form that his love took in her absence. This example illuminates something important about Frankl's philosophy of time that can be missed if the focus is only on the consolatory dimension. He was not simply saying that the past is a comfort. He was saying that the past is the ground of meaning. The present is where meaning is actualized, where choices are made and creative acts are performed. The future is where meaning is oriented, where the goals and commitments that give shape to present action are located. But the past is where meaning is certified, where what was potential becomes actual, where what was hoped for becomes real, where what was loved becomes permanently part of the fabric of existence. The past is not behind us in the sense of being left behind. It is beneath us, the accumulated foundation of everything that has been real. Frankl drew on Heidegger's analysis of temporality here, but pushed it in a different direction from Heidegger's own. Heidegger had emphasized that authentic existence requires running forward toward one's own death, holding death in view as the horizon that individualizes and authenticates each moment of choice. For Heidegger, the past is primarily the thrownness that one is always already beyond, the facticity from which freedom must wrench itself free. Frankl accepted the importance of confronting one's finitude, but rejected the Heideggerian devaluation of the past. For Frankl, the past is not merely the inert stone of facticity from which freedom must escape. It is the record of the freedom already exercised, the testimony of choices already made, the evidence that this particular person has been here and has done something with the fact of being here. It is, in this sense, not merely the ground of existence but its most durable achievement. There is a metaphor Frankl used in his lectures that captures this vision with particular clarity. He compared a person who has lived many years to a farmer who, at the end of the harvest season, surveys full barns. The future may be uncertain, the next harvest may fail, the weather may be bad, there may be fewer good years remaining. But the barns are full now. The work of the growing season is done. Whatever happens next, what has been gathered cannot be ungathered. The farmer stands on the solid ground of a completed harvest, and no storm that comes next can undo that solidity. Most people, Frankl observed, look only at the field and the uncertain weather ahead. The wisdom he was trying to cultivate, in himself, in his patients, in anyone who would listen, was the capacity to also look at the full barns. This metaphor has particular power when applied to the specific crisis of aging and mortality. Modern culture tends to treat aging as a process of increasing poverty, of running out of energy, of capacity, of time, of relevance. This framing is not entirely wrong. There are real losses in aging, real diminishments that must be acknowledged. But Frankl insisted that it is profoundly incomplete. An old person has not merely grown older. They have accumulated, have built, over decades, a store of experience, relationship, knowledge, and love that a young person cannot yet have. They have, in the language of his metaphor, fuller barns. The meaning of their lives is not diminished by their approaching end. If anything, it is completed by it, each day added to the total of what has been lived rather than subtracted from the shrinking remainder. Frankl applied this philosophy to the extreme case of terminal illness with particular care and precision. He worked with dying patients who had concluded that their lives were already effectively over, that what remained was merely the biological process of winding down, without any significance. He challenged this conclusion on philosophical grounds, but not with false comfort. He did not tell dying patients that everything would be all right, or that they would find peace, or that their suffering had some larger cosmic purpose he could reveal to them. What he did instead was draw their attention to what was already real, already accomplished, already given, already loved. He invited them to inhabit the past not as a place of regret but as a place of evidence. Evidence that they had been here. Evidence that their being here had mattered. Evidence that the world had been touched by their particular presence, and that this touch, once given, could not be withdrawn. In one of the most moving passages in his writing, Frankl describes an exchange with an elderly woman who was near death and who told him that she had been very close to God throughout her life but that she feared God had abandoned her in her final illness. Frankl did not offer theological reassurance. Instead, he said to her, "In your long life, you must have had many opportunities to do good, to care for people, to bring something valuable into the world. All of that still exists. It has not disappeared." The woman's expression changed. She was quiet for a moment, and then she spoke about her children, her grandchildren, the years of her marriage, the small daily acts of care and attention that had characterized her life. She died, Frankl reported, in a state of calm, not because her fear had been taken away, but because she had been helped to see that her life was real, that what she had made of it was real, and that no subsequent event, not even death itself, could make it not real. This is the deepest implication of Frankl's philosophy of time, that the permanence of the past is not merely a philosophical curiosity but an existential resource. It is something that a person can actually stand on, draw strength from, orient themselves by. The past is not the realm of what might have been or what was lost. It is the realm of what was, full stop. And what was, is. Permanently, indestructibly, beyond the reach of any storm. In a world of radical impermanence, where relationships end, achievements fade, bodies fail, and time itself seems to conspire against everything one values, Frankl's insight that the past is the one dimension of existence that cannot be taken points toward a foundation that is more solid than any future promise. It points toward the only ground that, once established, cannot be eroded, the ground of what has already been fully and genuinely lived.